Before you open a hive, you smoke it. Not to hurt anything. Smoke does something stranger than that. A honeybee colony reads smoke as a forest fire, and a colony that believes the world is ending stops guarding the door and starts eating. It gorges on honey, because a bee that might have to abandon everything wants to carry as much of home in her body as she can. So the guards leave their posts. The alarm scent stops moving. The whole city goes quiet and busy and inward, and a man in a white suit can lift the lid off 10,000 lives, and none of them come for him. Beekeepers will tell you the smoke is a kindness, and it is. It is also the most elegant act of deception performed by any human being on any Tuesday morning in America. You convince a fortress that its problem is somewhere else, and then you walk in through the front. I'm Nathan, and I want to be honest with you about why that image has been sitting on my chest for a week. The story I'm going to tell you is about a father who spent 23 years being other people's smoke, and about the 90 minutes when he finally had to do it for himself, on his own son's behalf, against men who thought a quiet 51-year-old with bee stings on his forearms was the safest person in Texas to threaten. There's a version of this you can guess. That version has a rifle in it. Ours doesn't, or not the way you think. What this one has is a coffee can, a list of names, and the terrible arithmetic of a man who never once in his life asked for a favor he did not intend to leave uncollected. Stay with the clock. 90 minutes is longer than you think, and shorter than anyone deserves. Keenan Stancil kept 412 hives that spring, and he could have told you where every one of them sat without looking at a map. That was not a party trick. It was a livelihood. He bred queens, not honey, though the honey happened. And queen breeding is a trade that punishes a sloppy memory the way the sea punishes a sloppy knot. A queen breeder has to know which yard has which mother line, which nucleus colony went queenless 9 days ago, which grafting frame went into which cell builder on which morning, and what the weather did on the afternoon those virgins were supposed to fly out and mate. Get one card out of order and you lose a season. Keenan had never lost a season. He had lost other things, but never a season. He was 51. He was built like a man who had been lean his whole life and had stopped noticing. Sun had made a leather thing of the back of his neck and a permanent pale stripe at his hairline where the veil sat. He wore a white suit that had gone the color of weak tea, and he never zipped the hood all the way, because he liked to hear the pitch of a colony before he saw it, and a zipped hood muffles the sound. His hands were mapwork, knuckles thickened, 2 fingers that no longer straightened all the way, a white seam across the left palm that he told people was a fencing accident, which was true if you allowed for a generous definition of fencing. The operation ran out of 80 acres of scrub and live oak outside a nothing town called Verdine, 40 miles up from the river, close enough to the valley to catch the citrus bloom and high enough into the brush country to catch the guajillo and the mesquite. He had a metal shop building with a walk-in cooler, a grafting room with a humidifier, and a countertop lined with cell bars, a flatbed and a boom, and a bunkhouse with 4 cots for the men who came up from the valley for the grafting weeks. 3 men worked for him year-round. Kelso Bramlett, 60, was the one who could not sit still. He ran the crop duster strip on the neighboring section and flew Keenan's queen shipments to Del Rio when the roads got interesting. Vern Lance was a retired customs broker out of Laredo who had gotten bored of retirement in 11 days and now did Keenan's paperwork and international queen permits with the joyless precision of a man who had spent 30 years watching people lie on forms. And there was a kid, Aiden Yarber, 23, who had shown up asking for seasonal work and stayed 3 years because Keenan taught him things and did not talk down to him while doing it. They had a rhythm. February, the almond brokers called, and Keenan said no, because he did not truck bees to California and never would. March through May was grafting and cell building and mating nukes, and the yards moved on a schedule Keenan kept in his head, and Vern kept on paper, and the 2 versions always matched. Summer they made splits and sold queens by mail in little wooden cages with candy plugs and 3 attendants each. Fall they wintered down and Keenan fixed everything that had broken and pretended he was not counting days. He counted days because of the letters. Rowan was 15 and away at school. That was the arrangement, and Keenan had made it himself with his eyes open, and it still felt like something he had to keep re-agreeing to every few weeks so he did not go get the boy and bring him home. The school was Wexcombe Academy, up in the hill country outside Kerrville. Small, old, more horse pasture than campus, 140 students, a dining hall with a fireplace that got used maybe 8 days a year. It had been Talitha's idea, from back when idea was still a word that had a future attached to it. Talitha Stancil had taught 8th grade for 11 years and had opinions about what a school was supposed to do, and Wexcombe met about 9 of her 12 criteria, which she said was the highest score she had ever given anything except her husband. She died 3 years before this story starts. Ovarian, found late, the way it usually is. It took 14 months, and Keenan learned in those 14 months that he could hold absolutely still for an extraordinarily long time, and that holding still did not help. The bees had been hers first. That surprised people. She had kept 2 hives behind the house as a hobby and had gotten into a small public feud with a county agent over pesticide notification, which she won. Keenan had learned the trade to have something to talk to her about in the last summer, and then he had kept going, because he could not think of a way to stop that would not feel like a second funeral. So the boy went to Wexcombe because it was what she had wanted, and because a queen rearing season means 18-hour days from March to June, and a man cannot do that and be a decent parent to a grieving 14-year-old at the same time, and Keenan had decided that of the 2 things he was worse at, he would outsource the one where a stranger could do it competently. The letters were Rowan's idea. Keenan hated phones, not in the way people say they hate phones. He carried a flip phone with 11 numbers in it, and he had a rule, unspoken and absolute, that he did not say anything into a phone he would not be comfortable seeing read aloud in a room full of strangers. Rowan, at 11, had asked why his dad always walked outside to talk and always said so little, and Keenan had said something about habit, and Rowan, who was a strange and precise kid, had said, "Then I'll write." He wrote every Sunday. Actual paper, actual stamps, an envelope with his blocky handwriting getting steadily less blocky over 4 years. He wrote about the cross-country team, and about a history teacher he was at war with, and about a girl named Winnow Tetlow who ran the same route he did in the opposite direction, so they passed each other twice every morning and had never once spoken. He wrote about the food. He wrote twice about his mother, and Keenan had read those 2 letters so many times the creases had gone furry. Keenan wrote back. He was not good at it. His letters were shorter and were mostly about the bees, and he did not know that Rowan kept every one of them in a shoebox under his bed at Wexcombe, banded in 4s, or that Rowan had once, drunk on nothing but a 14-year-old's misery, read 3 of them out loud to his roommate at 2 in the morning, as proof that his father loved him. That is the part of this that matters, not the 23 years, the shoebox. There is one more thing to put on the table before the trouble starts, and it is small, and it is buried. Behind the queen-rearing shed, under a paving stone, under 11 inches of caliche, there was a coffee can. It was a 2-pound Folgers can with the plastic lid still on it, and a bread bag inside the lid. Inside the bag was a phone that had never been used, a charger, and a folded sheet of graph paper with 41 lines on it. Each line had a name, or something that stood in for a name, and a place, and a year. Nothing else. No numbers, no notes, no explanation of what any of it meant. Keenan had buried it the week Talitha's diagnosis came back, and he had never dug it up, and he had checked the paving stone maybe twice a year, the way you check a smoke detector you hope is a waste of money. Vern asked him once, joking, what he had under there. A rainy day fund? Keenan said it was a list of people who owed him. Vern laughed and said everybody's got one of those. Keenan said no. He said most men keep a list of people who owe them money, and money is the weakest thing anyone can owe you, because it can be paid. Vern asked what was better. Keenan thought about it and said, the other kind. Here is what Keenan Stancil did for 23 years, told plainly, because the rest of this does not work if you are guessing. He did not shoot people for a living. He would want that said first. He put in 6 years as an infantryman and then 3 more in a battalion reconnaissance element, and he was good at it, and it was, by the standards of the rest of his career, an entirely ordinary job. Then, in his 30th year of life, a very tired man in a rented conference room in Fayetteville asked him a question that had nothing to do with marksmanship. The question was, you grew up on a road with 9 houses on it. Tell me who owed money to whom. Keenan told him, "It took 11 minutes." He named the man who let his brother-in-law park a boat on his side lot for 4 years, and what that had cost the man in dignity. He named the widow who had been slipped grocery money by a neighbor who did not want it known. He named the 2 families who had stopped speaking over a dog, and the 1 child who moved between them anyway. He had been 8 years old on that road. He had never once been asked to remember any of it, and he remembered all of it, and he had assumed everyone did. They do not. What Keenan had, the thing that got him borrowed by 3 governments over 23 years, was an unteachable talent for reading the invisible ledger of a place, not the official structure. Everyone can learn the official structure. He read who actually owed whom, who was ashamed in front of whom, whose cousin had been humiliated in what year, which lieutenant was carrying a debt he could not talk about, which quiet uncle everyone was afraid of, which loyal driver was loyal to a man 3 towns over. He would arrive in a place, and he would talk to nobody important, and in 6 weeks, he would hand somebody a map that made an organization look like plumbing. The unit had a name that changed every few years, and a mission statement that was 2 sentences long and meant nothing. What it actually did was human network reduction. You did not have to arrest 30 men if you could find the 4 relationships holding the 30 together. You did not have to raid a house if you could make the landlord evict them, the doctor stop coming, the money mover stop taking calls, and the cousin in the next country stop answering the phone. Do that in a single afternoon, and a functioning cell becomes 30 frightened individuals in a parking lot, and frightened individuals do the single most useful thing on earth, which is talk. He was loaned out. That is the polite word. 3 times in 3 different decades he was handed, along with a folder and a per diem, to services that were not American, a British effort in West Africa that everyone has forgotten, a Colombian judicial protection program that lost 11 judges the year before he arrived and none the year after, and a 14-month arrangement in the Balkans that he still would not discuss, and that was the reason for the seam in his left palm. He never ran the operations. He built the maps and handed them over, and went home. And every single time, because of who he was, he came out the other end with something the men who ordered the operations never got. Individual human beings who were alive, or free, or unruined, specifically because of a choice Keenan Stancil had made in a hallway when nobody was watching. A judge's daughter in Medellin who was not in the car, a translator in Kandahar whose name he took off a list before the list went up the chain, a 26-year-old accountant in a Bogotá hotel in 2009 who had been photographed with the wrong men and who Keenan had walked out a service entrance at 4 in the morning and put on a bus with $300, because she was 26 and had been handed a job by her family and had not yet done anything that could not be undone. 41 lines on a piece of graph paper. He never called any of them. That was the discipline of the thing, and it was the reason the list stayed good. A debt you never mention is a debt that compounds. A debt you cash in for something small is spent forever. Keenan had spent 23 years accumulating an asset that appeared on no ledger anywhere on earth, and then he had buried it in a coffee can and gone to raise bees, and he genuinely, sincerely, in the front of his mind, intended never to touch it. Now the other side of the board. The valley moves. It has always moved. People, cattle, citrus, cars, and for the last 40 years the other thing. And the movement is not chaotic. It is a set of routes maintained by people who think about them the way a railroad thinks about track. A route is a business asset. A route is worth more than any load that ever travels on it. The route that ran through the Ravenhill Ranch had been good for 9 years. It came up out of a crossing below Salinenio, over private land through 4 gates, and joined a farm-to-market road north of a town so small it shared a post office. It was good because it was boring. Nobody looked at it. The rancher, an 83-year-old named Ordell, the last of a family that had been on that dirt since 1911, could not walk his own fence line anymore, and his grandsons were in Houston and did not come, and so for 9 years men had cut the same 3-strand fence in the same 2 places, driven through, wired it back, and left him alone. There was even a courtesy to it. Nobody bothered Ordell. Ordell was scenery. The men who owned that route worked for a plaza boss named Ismael Ruelas, and Ismael Ruelas worked for a man named Fidencio Barones, and Fidencio Barones had a nickname that he had chosen for himself and made stick, which tells you almost everything. They called him El Cartero, the postman. He was 58, soft-bodied, immaculate, and he had come up not through violence but through the part of the business that violence is for, logistics and messaging. His genius, if you can stand the word, was that he understood that the product of an organization like his is not narcotics. The product is compliance, and compliance is manufactured by messages, and messages are a craft. Anyone can kill a man. Fidencio Barones killed almost nobody personally, and was more feared than men who killed constantly, because he had spent 30 years being unbelievably specific about what he sent, to whom, and when. He sent a mayor's own campaign posters back to him, all 400, folded into squares. He sent a rival's mother a birthday cake, on the correct day, with the correct grandchildren's names on it, and nothing else happened, and the rival left the country within a month. He sent a customs supervisor a photograph of the supervisor's daughter's school shoes, and only the shoes, sitting on a step. He was a man who had discovered that the human imagination will always build a worse thing than you could have actually done, if you give it the right small object to start from. He had been doing it so long, and it had worked so completely, that he had come to believe the mechanism was the world, that people were envelopes, that anyone, given the right message, sorts himself into the right pile. That belief is the fault line this entire story runs along, and you should hold on to it, because it is going to open under him. The trouble started with forage, which is the most boring possible cause, and is the true one. In the second week of March, Keenan lost 110 hives worth of expected bloom when a landowner 60 miles east sold his Guajillo flats to a solar company, and the clearing crews came in 3 weeks early. Keenan needed brush country, in bloom, within trucking distance, for the back half of his mating season. Vern made calls. Kelso flew a grid and came back with photographs. And the best block of untouched Guajillo and blackbrush within 2 hours sat on the western third of the Ravenhill Ranch, in a series of shallow draws that ran, though Keenan did not know it and had no way to know it, exactly along the route. Ordell Ravenhill was delighted. Nobody had asked him for anything in 11 years except money. Keenan sat on his porch for 2 hours and listened to a story about a 1948 flood, and left with a handshake lease and a hand-drawn map, and 4 nights later a flatbed with a boom set 400 hives across 7 draws, on pallets, 4 to a pallet, in the pattern a queen breeder uses when he wants drone congregation areas he can predict. You cannot walk through 400 hives in the dark. That is not a threat, and it is not clever. It is just a fact about bees. A colony at rest at 2 in the morning will tolerate a man walking a fence line 80 yards away, and will not tolerate a truck with its lights on rolling between the pallets. And the first vehicle that came through on the 11th night hit a pallet with its mirror, and put 9 hives on the ground. And 2 men spent the following 40 minutes in the brush being taught something about the natural world that neither of them ever fully recovered from. Keenan found the wreckage at dawn, along with tire tracks, along with a cut fence that had been wired back in a way that told him a great deal about the person who had done the wiring, because there is a way that men wire a fence when they have done it 200 times. He stood there for a long while. Kelso, who had flown in, said the obvious thing, which was that they should move the yards. Keenan said, "That's $90,000 of forage." Kelso said, "That's somebody's road." Keenan said he knew. Then he did something that Kelso told me. Years later, he thought about every week for the rest of his life. He did not move the yards. He did not call the sheriff. He went into town and bought $40 worth of reflective marker posts and spent 2 days putting them at the entrance to every draw, so that anyone driving through at night would see exactly where the hives were and could avoid them. He was not marking his territory. He was, sincerely and with his whole chest, trying to help the people who were cutting the fence not get hurt. That distinction is going to matter to about a dozen people before this is over, and every one of them is going to get it wrong. Ismael Ruelas came out to the ranch himself on the 6th of April, which was a mistake he did not know he was making. He came in daylight, in a clean white pickup, with a man named Everardo Gastelum in the passenger seat and 2 more in the bed, and he parked at the head of the second draw and got out, and stood with his hands on his hips, looking at 400 white boxes stacked in the brush like a small abandoned city. Keenan was 2 draws over, working. He heard the truck. He finished the frame he was holding, set it back, closed the lid, and walked over with the smoker still going in his left hand, veil up, unhurried, and Ismael Ruelas watched him come and made a series of assessments that were all, individually, reasonable, and that added up to the wrongest conclusion any man made in the state of Texas that year. He saw a sunburned, white-suited hobbyist in his 50s with bad hands and a slow walk. He saw a man who had not looked at the 2 men in the truck bed even once. He read that as obliviousness. It was not obliviousness. Keenan had counted them, sorted them, and dismissed them before he was 30 feet from the truck, and the reason he did not look again was that there was nothing more to learn. Ruelas was polite. That is the thing people misunderstand about that world. He said good morning. He said he represented some folks with an interest in the ranch roads. He said the boxes were in a bad spot and would need to move by the weekend. He said he would pay for the trouble, and he named a number that was, honestly, generous. Keenan said the lease ran to the 15th of June and that he'd be gone the 16th. He said it evenly, the way you'd tell a man the store closes at 6. Ruelas said that was not going to work. Keenan said he understood, and then he said the sentence that Everardo Gastelum repeated to 3 different people that week because it had unsettled him and he did not know why. He said, "You've got 4 gates and 1 bad crossing. If you go in at the north gate and come out on the section line, you miss every yard I've got, and you save 11 minutes. I marked it. The posts are the ones with the orange tops." Then he offered them water from the cooler in his truck, and one of the men in the bed took some, and they drove away. Gastelum's unease was correct, and he could not have explained it. What had happened was that a beekeeper had just described their route back to them, more accurately than they usually described it to each other, including a timing improvement, while offering them a bottle of water, without any indication that he thought he had said anything at all. Ruelas decided, on the drive back, that the old man was a harmless idiot who had gotten lucky with a guess. For 6 weeks, the arrangement actually held. They used the north gate. Nobody cut Keenan's fence. Twice, Aiden Yarber found a case of beer left on a pallet at the head of the second draw, which he thought was hilarious, and Keenan did not comment on. What killed it was not Keenan. It was money, and it was Ordell Ravenhill. Because Ordell, 83, delighted to be asked for something, flush for the first time in a decade with a B lease and a man who came and sat on his porch, got his fence fixed, properly. He hired a crew out of Zapata, and they ran new wire and new corner braces along 4 miles of the western boundary, and they welded the gates, and they set a pipe gate with a chain and a lock at the north entrance, and they did it in 9 days in the 3rd week of May, and nobody told anybody, because why would an old man tell anyone he was fixing his own fence? A route that has been good for 9 years does not survive a new fence and a locked gate. 2 loads got turned around. 1 got stuck at the crossing for 11 hours. And in the accounting that happened afterward, somewhere in a room in Reynosa, the question was asked, what changed on the Ravenhill? And the answer that came back up the chain, from Ruelas, who had every reason to make it somebody else's fault, was the B-man. It went up to Fidencio Barones on a Thursday. He was told there was an Anglo, 50-ish, running 400 hives on the Ravenhill, who had been asked to move and had refused, and who had then gotten the old man to lock the gates. Barones listened. He asked one question, which was whether the B-man had any people. Ruelas said he had 2 old men and a kid. Barones said, then he has one thing. He had already read the answer. He had the boys' school inside of a day, because that is not hard. Because a man with a son and a dead wife and a business with a website leaves a paper trail a competent teenager could follow. Wexcombe Academy, Kerrville, 3 hours and 40 minutes from the second draw. And Fidencio Barones did what he had done for 30 years, which was to design a message. He did not intend to hurt the boy. That is important, and it is not a defense. In his own mind, he was not a man who hurt children. He was a man who made hurting children unnecessary by demonstrating, once, cleanly, how completely available they were. The message he designed was, we took him, you saw how easy it was, we gave him back, Now move your boxes and remember this every day for the rest of your life. He would tell you that this was mercy. He had told himself that for 3 decades and the arithmetic had always worked. He had never once, in 30 years, sent a message to a man who had spent 23 years building the machine that reads them. The 11th of June was a Friday, and Friday at Wexcombe meant the supply delivery came at 10:40 and the front gate stood open for 11 minutes while the truck backed in. Rowan Stancil was not supposed to be near the gate. He was supposed to be in a 4th period study block. He was near the gate because cross-country did a maintenance run on Fridays at 10:30, 6 miles, out the front and up the county road and back through the horse pasture. And he was the second fastest boy on a team of 11, and he ran the first mile too hard every single time because he could not help himself. He was 300 yards up the county road, alone, out ahead of the pack, when a white Suburban came past him, slowed, and stopped. There were 4 of them, and it took 9 seconds. He got a hand up. He got one shout out, which 2 of the boys behind him heard and could not place, and then the road was empty, and a team of 10 teenagers ran past the spot 40 seconds later without seeing anything at all, because there was nothing to see. The first person to know something was wrong was a 15-year-old named Keon Pruitt, who finished the loop and did not find Rowan at the water cooler and thought, at first, that Rowan had pulled ahead and gone in to shower. It was 11:40 before anyone was worried. It was 12:05 before the school called Kerr County. It was 12:40 before a deputy arrived, and 1:15 before anyone used the word abduction out loud, because a 15-year-old boy who does not come back from a run is, statistically and reasonably, a boy who quit a run. The head of school, a decent and completely overwhelmed man named Dean Pruitt, no relation to the boy, a coincidence that would generate 4 hours of wasted investigative attention, called Keenan Stancil at 1:52 in the afternoon. Keenan was in the metal shop at Verdine with his arms in a wash tank. Vern brought him the phone. He listened for about 90 seconds. He asked 4 questions. What time did the run start? Who saw him last and where exactly? Is the front gate camera a real camera or a dummy? And had anyone called his son's phone from the school's own landline rather than a cell? Dean Pruitt, who had been braced for screaming, found the questions so calm that he later said they frightened him more than screaming would have. Then Keenan said thank you and hung up and stood there with his hands still wet. Vern said, Keenan. Keenan said, get Kelso on the strip. Tell him to pull the cowl and pretend he's working on the engine. Don't call him. Drive over. Vern said, what's happened? And Keenan said, in about 10 minutes a phone is going to ring, and I need you to not be standing next to me when it does. Everything he did in the next 8 minutes he did with a stillness that Vern Lance, who had spent 30 years across a counter from smugglers and had a good eye, described as the single most alarming thing he had ever watched a human being do. He dried his hands. He walked out past the grafting room to the back of the queen-rearing shed. He moved a paving stone, and he dug, kneeling, with a hand trowel in the caliche for 4 minutes, and lifted out a 2-pound coffee can with a plastic lid. He was sitting on the tailgate of his truck with the can unopened beside him when the flip phone rang from a number with a Reynosa prefix. The voice was warm. That was the thing about Fidencio Barones that everyone who survived him mentions. He sounded like a man calling to reschedule a lunch. He said, in good English, that he had Keenan's son. He said the boy was fine, was not frightened, a lie, and a strange one to bother with, and was sitting in a room with a bottle of water and a chair. He said that in a few days the boy would be returned, and that in the meantime the 400 hives on the Ravenhill would be gone by Sunday. Then he laughed. It was not a cruel laugh. It was worse than that. It was a small, comfortable laugh, the laugh of a man in his own office who has done this 1,100 times. He said, he belongs to us now. Do you understand? Not for a week, for always. Bury the memory of him being only yours. Every year on his birthday you will think of me. That is the arrangement. There was a silence of maybe 4 seconds. And Keenan Stancil said, and I want to be precise about this, because 2 people heard it and their accounts agree almost word for word. He said, for 23 years, 3 governments paid me to take apart men like you. Not to kill you. To take you apart. I retired. I have not made a phone call in 11 years. Barone said, "Senor." Keenan said, "You have 90 minutes to put him back where you found him, untouched, and then you have the rest of your life, which will be shorter than it was this morning. 90 minutes, starting now." Fidencio Barones hung up on him. He hung up because in 30 years he had heard 400 versions of that speech, from mayors and captains and fathers, and every single one of them had been a man buying time with a fantasy. That is a completely reasonable read of the data. That is what makes it beautiful, and that is what makes it fatal. He told Ruelas, later, laughing. He says he is going to unplug me. Here is what Keenan did with the first 20 minutes, and it is nothing that anyone expects. He did not call the FBI. He did not call the Rangers. He did not get a gun. He did not get in the truck. He opened the coffee can, took out the phone, plugged it into the truck's cigarette lighter, unfolded the graph paper, and began to read it. Then he made 4 calls. You have to understand what the 41 lines actually were, because the shape of them is the shape of the next 90 minutes. They were not assets. Nobody on that list had ever agreed to anything. Not one of them had signed a paper, or taken a dollar, or knowingly worked for the United States government or any other. Every single name on that page was a person who was alive, or free, or undisgraced, or still had their children, because at some point Keenan Stancil had made a decision in a corridor that cost him something and that nobody ever found out about. He had never contacted a single one of them. That was not sentiment. It was tradecraft of a very old and very cold kind. An unspoken debt is the only kind that gains value with time, because it is never tested, and because the person carrying it builds a version of you in their head that gets larger every year you stay silent. 41 people had been carrying a version of Keenan Stancil around in their heads for between 11 and 26 years. 9 of them were dead. 6 he could not find in the time he had. 12 were irrelevant to a stretch of scrub in Starr County, Texas. 14 were not. The first call went to a man in Matamoros named Cuauhtemoc Villagran, who was 55 and owned 9 laundromats and 3 tire shops, and who, in 2004, had been a 22-year-old driver whose name Keenan had removed from a target list because the kid had a pregnant girlfriend and had been driving for 8 days. Villagran had never known Keenan's name. He had known a voice on a phone that said, in Spanish, "Go home tonight and do not go back." And he had gone home, and 11 days later, everyone he had been driving for was gone. He answered on the 4th ring. Keenan said 11 words. Villagran sat down on the floor of a laundromat and did not speak for a while. Then he said, "Tell me the name." The second call went to a woman in San Antonio, a customs supervisor's widow. The third went to a retired Colombian prosecutor now living in Miami with a landline and a very long memory. The fourth went to a phone in Bogotá that Keenan expected not to work anymore. It worked. While it rang, Keenan looked at his watch. 81 minutes. Because here is what he had not said to Fidencio Barones on the phone, and what Barones, being a man who believed people were envelopes, could not have imagined. Keenan had not threatened to come for him. He had no intention of coming for him. Coming for a man is what you do when you cannot do the other thing. He was going to take the 4 relationships that were holding 30 men together, and he was going to cut them, one at a time, in 90 minutes, from the tailgate of a pickup truck in a bee yard, using nothing but a list of people who had spent 2 decades waiting for a chance to be square with him. Minute 9. The cell that had Rowan Stancil consisted, functionally, of 31 people, and like every organization on Earth, it did not run on its org chart. It ran on 9 relationships, and Keenan had the shape of them within 4 minutes of the first call, because Cuauhtemoc Villagran had spent 20 years listening to men talk in laundromats. There was a money mover in McAllen, an exchange house operator named Silvio Zavaleta, who handled the cell's cash conversion and who had a brother-in-law problem. There was a landlord, a woman who owned 6 properties in Roma and rented 3 of them to men she pretended not to know about, whose eldest son was applying to a police academy. There was a doctor. There is always a doctor. His name was Isidro Rendon. He was 69. He had lost his license in 1998, and he had a daughter in Houston who did not know what he did. There was a lookout network of teenagers with cheap phones run by a 19-year-old. And there was, above all of it, the thing that actually held Fidencio Barones's world together, which was his sister. Otilia Barones was 51 years old and had run her brother's books since she was 26. She had never been photographed with him. She lived in Monterrey, she had 2 grown daughters, she went to Mass, and she was, in the flat assessment of every intelligence service that had ever looked at the organization, the load-bearing wall. Keenan knew her name before Villagrán said it. He had known it since 2009. Because in a hotel in Bogotá in October of 2009, a 26-year-old woman with a Mexican passport and a folder of documents she did not fully understand had been photographed in a lobby with 3 men who were about to be arrested, and she had been slated to go with them. And a quiet American had knocked on her door at 4 in the morning and walked her down a service stairwell and out through a kitchen and put her on a bus to Cali with $300 and had said exactly one sentence to her, which was, "You have not done anything yet that you cannot walk back from. Go and do the walking back." She had not walked it back. She had gone home and taken over her brother's books and become the load-bearing wall. Line 19 on the graph paper. Bogotá, 2009. No name. Keenan had written only hotel, 4 a.m., bus. He had not known, when he wrote it, who she would become. He had known it for 6 years by the time his son was taken, because he read, because he had never stopped reading, and because a man who does that job never really retires, he just stops filing. He had never dialed her. 16 years. Minute 19. He dialed her. It began, as these things always do, with something small and unglamorous. At minute 14, a 19-year-old named Ramiro, who ran the cell's lookout kids in 3 towns, got a phone call from his uncle, who ran a body shop, who had gotten a call from Cuauhtemoc Villagrán in Matamoros, who was owed a favor by the uncle from a thing in 2011. The uncle did not explain. He said one sentence: "Whatever you have running today, you have nothing running today. Turn the phones off. Do not ask." Ramiro turned the phones off. 11 teenagers in 3 towns stopped answering, and a cell that had eyes on 4 highways went blind at minute 16 and did not know it, because blindness is silent. At minute 22, Silvio Zavaleta, the exchange house man in McAllen, received a visit from a woman he did not know, who did not come in, who stood at the counter and said that a friend of hers had asked her to say a specific date out loud to him, and said it, and left. The date was in 2016, and it referred to $11,000 and a nephew and a thing Zavaleta had been sure nobody living knew about. Zavaleta closed the exchange house at minute 24, drove to his mother's house, and turned off both phones. The cell's money stopped moving at minute 24. Nobody noticed until minute 40. At minute 29, the landlord in Roma got a phone call from a woman in San Antonio who introduced herself as nobody at all, and who said that she was calling about the police academy application, and that she had no intention of interfering with it, and that she wanted the landlord to understand that she had no intention of interfering with it, and that a house on Calle Bravo was going to be a problem for that application by this evening unless it was empty. The landlord drove to the house on Calle Bravo at minute 34 and threw 6 men out into the street with a cousin and a shotgun and an eviction speech of remarkable creativity. Those 6 men were not the men holding Rowan. They were the cell's second crew, and they scattered across 2 towns and started calling everyone they knew, and every one of those calls went into a system that was already dark. At minute 38, Dr. Isidro Rendon stopped answering. He stopped answering because a retired prosecutor in Miami had reached a cousin who had reached Rendon's daughter, and Rendon's daughter, who was 34 and an accountant and had spent her whole life not asking, had called her father and said, in tears, "Papa, someone just told me what you do." An organization that has no lookouts, no money conversion, no safe house, and no doctor is not an organization. It is a group of armed men in cars with no idea that anything has happened. That is the point. That is the whole art. Not one of those 4 events looked like an attack. Every one of them looked like a bad day. Meanwhile, Fidencio Barones was in his office in Reynosa, and the first thing that reached him at minute 41 was not any of it. It was a small, stupid thing. He could not get through to Ruelas. Rowan Stancil was in a shipping container, and this is where I need you to understand something about the boy. He had been in it for 4 hours. It was hot. There was a bottle of water, a bucket, and a plastic chair, and 2 men outside who spoke to each other in Spanish, and to him not at all. He had cried for about 20 minutes at the beginning, and he was not proud of that, and then he had stopped, because he had remembered a thing his father had taught him when he was 8 years old, and had assumed, until that afternoon, was a game. The game was called Count the Room. You go into a room, any room, a waiting room, a restaurant, a gas station, and you have 30 seconds, and then you close your eyes, and you say how many people, how many doors, what everyone is wearing, who is left-handed, who came in together, who is pretending not to be together, and what would change if the lights went out. Keenan had played it with him 100 times on 100 long drives, and it had never once occurred to Rowan that it was anything but his weird dad's weird game. He counted the container. He counted 11 paces long. He counted a door that opened out with a lever and a chain on the outside. He counted a 2-inch gap under the door where light came in and where, at one point, a shadow crossed twice going the same direction, meaning one man had walked past and come back, meaning there was a fence or a wall about 15 feet out. He counted the sound of a diesel generator that ran and cut out and ran again on a cycle, which meant it was on a thermostat, which meant it was cooling something, which meant there was another container. He counted a train, twice, 61 minutes apart. And he counted the men, 2 voices constant, a third voice that came twice. The third voice was younger and it argued. At the 4-hour mark, the third voice argued for 11 straight minutes about something Rowan could not follow. And then the door opened, and a man of about 26, with a bad haircut and a phone in his hand, looked at him for a long moment and said, in English, "You go to Wexcombe." Rowan said yes. The man said, "My cousin goes to Wexcombe." And then he closed the door. Minute 48. Otilia Barones had been on the phone with Keenan Stancil for 11 minutes and had said almost nothing at all. He had not threatened her. He had not mentioned 2009. He did not have to. She had recognized the voice in the first 4 words and had walked out of a room and into a garden and sat down on a low wall. What he said, in the flat voice of a man reading a weather report, was what was going to happen to her family over the next 11 months if her brother did not put the boy back. Not what Keenan would do. What would simply happen, mechanically, as a consequence, because 4 things had already been taken out and a 5th was going out in 9 minutes, and because an organization that goes dark for a day gets eaten by the organizations around it within a season. He named her daughters cities, not as a threat, and she understood the difference immediately, which is why it worked, and which is the exact skill her brother did not have. He named them the way an engineer names load paths. He said, "In 11 months your brother will be dead, or in Florence, Colorado, and neither of your daughters will be able to live in the country they were born in. And none of that requires me to do a single further thing after this afternoon. It's already moving. I started it 48 minutes ago, and I cannot stop most of it." Then he said, the only personal sentence in the entire call. He said, 16 years ago, I told you that you had not done anything yet that you couldn't walk back from. That stopped being true a long time ago. This is the last hour in your life when it's briefly true again. Otilia Barones sat on a low wall in a garden in Monterey with a phone against her ear and thought about a service stairwell and a kitchen and a bus. Then she said, "Where is the boy supposed to be put back?" Keenan said, "The gate he was taken from, untouched." 41 minutes. She said, "My brother will not do it." Keenan said, "I know, that's why I called you." Minute 61, and I want to slow down here, because what happened at minute 61 is the hinge of the entire thing, and it did not come from the list. The young man with the bad haircut was named Everardo Gastelum's nephew. His name was Ruben Osuna. He was 26. He had been in the organization for 4 years, and his cousin's kid, his aunt's grandson, was a 14-year-old day student at Wexcombe Academy on a scholarship the family had all cried about. Ruben had not been told where they were going that morning. He had been told to drive. He had found out what school it was when a boy in a Wexcombe cross-country singlet was put into the back of the Suburban, and he had spent 6 hours since then in a state that people in that business are not supposed to be able to enter. At minute 55, his phone had stopped working. Not broken. The network of people he called had simply stopped picking up. He called 7 people. Nobody answered. His uncle did not answer. Ruelas did not answer. The lookout kid did not answer. The doctor did not answer. At minute 58, he called the exchange house because it was the only number left and heard the recorded message of a business that had closed at 2 in the afternoon on a Friday, which never happens. And at minute 61, Ruben Osuna, who was not brave and not good, and had done 4 years of things he did not talk about, understood with total clarity that the organization he had put his life inside of had been switched off around him in 1 hour, that whoever had done it knew where he was, and that in about 30 minutes a 15-year-old boy was going to be either the reason he lived or the reason he did not. He walked into the container and said, "Get up." The other 2 men outside were arguing with the empty air of their own dead phones. Ruben told them Ruelas had called, and the location was blown and they were moving the boy. He said it with the total confidence of a man who has stopped calculating. They believed him, because everything he said matched the only fact they had, which was that nothing was working. Rowan Stancil got into the back of a Suburban for the 2nd time that day, and the 3rd man got in the passenger seat, and 11 minutes later, at a gas station outside Falfurrias, Ruben Osuna put a pistol against the other man's thigh under the dash and told him to get out of the car. Minute 81. Fidencio Barones's world had, in his own words later, stopped returning. He had called 19 people in 40 minutes. 6 had answered. Of those 6, 2 had told him things that made no sense. The exchange house closed, the Roma house emptied by its own landlord with a shotgun, and 4 had asked him what was happening, which is the worst possible thing for a man in his position to be asked. He had a war room instinct and no war to fight. There was no raid. Nobody had been shot. No police had moved. The Americans had not crossed. Nothing had been seized. There was nothing on the news. His people were simply not there anymore. At minute 74, he had called his sister, and she had not picked up, and that had frightened him more than anything else in a very long life, because Otilia had picked up every time he had called her since 1994. At minute 79, his lieutenant, a 38-year-old named Rigoberto Zepeda, who had been with him for 16 years and who had a reputation for being unshakable and had earned it, drove to 3 of the cell's locations in succession and found a shuttered exchange house, a house on Calle Bravo with its door open and a woman's cousin sitting on the steps, and a lot behind a feed store with 2 shipping containers, a running generator, 1 open door, 1 plastic chair, 1 bottle of water, and no boy, and no vehicle, and no men. At minute 87, Rigoberto Zepeda called the number Fidencio Barones had called from at minute 2. Keenan Stancil answered on the first ring. I have heard 2 accounts of that call, and they differ only in profanity. Zepeda was not a screamer. He had a reputation. He was screaming. He said the cell was gone. He said, in a mixture of Spanish and English, that the money was gone, the houses were gone, the doctor was gone, the kids on the phones were gone, the boy was gone, the cars were gone. 3 men had been arrested in Roma on a warrant nobody had ever heard of, and Ruelas had run. Then he said the thing that Keenan repeated to nobody except, eventually, his son. He said, everyone's gone. Everyone dropped dead. Whose wrath did you bring down on us? What did you unleash? Who are you? Keenan Stancil was sitting on the tailgate of a truck in a bee yard with a smoker cooling beside him and 400 colonies humming in 7 draws, and the sun was going orange, and he had not raised his voice or left his own property or touched a weapon in 90 minutes. He said, nobody. That's the part you can't get around. There's nobody to fight. I made 8 phone calls. Zepeda said something unrepeatable. Keenan said, 3 minutes. And then he said, the only thing he said that afternoon that had any heat in it at all. He said, you people think a family is a pressure point. It's not. It's the only thing anybody keeps a list for. At minute 89, a white Suburban with 2 people in it stopped on the county road 300 yards from the front gate of Wexcombe Academy, and a 15-year-old boy got out. Ruben Osuna did not say anything to him. He had said one thing during the entire drive, at a stoplight in Freer, which was, "Tell them I brought you back." Then he had driven with both hands on the wheel, like a student driver, for 2 hours and 50 minutes. Rowan Stancil walked up the county road toward the gate. There were 4 sheriff's vehicles and an FBI Suburban, and every light in the school on, and a woman in a windbreaker saw him first and started running, and then everybody was running. He was sunburned, dehydrated, and had a bruise on his left forearm from the door of a shipping container, untouched by the definition of every person who examined him that night. The clock on Keenan Stancil's phone, when Dean Pruitt called him at 4:31 p.m. and could not get a full sentence out, read 89 minutes and 40 seconds. Now, what happened to Fidencio Barones? I have thought about how to tell this part, because it is the part people want, and it is the part that is easiest to get wrong. There was no confrontation. Keenan Stancil never met him, never spoke to him again, and never went south of the river for the rest of his life. What Keenan did was he mailed him. Understand what the man was. He was not a boss in the way movies use the word. He held together an organization of about 200 people, of whom he directly commanded maybe 40, by being the person who sent the messages. His entire authority was that when a thing needed to be communicated, it went out through him, and everyone understood it had come from him, and nobody ever questioned whether a message was really his. Nobody had ever needed to. That is the flaw in every messaging system that has never been attacked. It has no way to verify itself. At 6:20 that evening, while Rowan Stancil was drinking an electrolyte drink in a school infirmary and refusing to let go of a nurse's sleeve, Keenan Stancil made his 9th and last phone call from the coffee can phone, and it went back to Otilia Barones. He did not ask her to do anything. He told her what he was going to do, and then he asked her, very simply, whether she wanted her family to be inside it or outside it, and he gave her until midnight. What he was going to do was this. Over the following 19 days, 4 things were sent. To 3 plaza bosses in 2 states went photocopies of ledger pages, real ones with real numbers, that showed skim and that were formatted the way Otilia Barones's books were formatted, and that arrived in envelopes with Fidencio's own courier chain, through the routes only he used, in the manner only he used, with the small deliberate object that was his signature. In each envelope, a single unbent paperclip. To a rival organization in Tamaulipas went a list of 11 crossing points and the names of the men on them, accurate, checkable, worth a great deal of money, arriving through the same chain. To the DEA office in McAllen went nothing at all, because Keenan Stancil never gave them a thing, and that mattered later. And to Fidencio Barones went 1 envelope, delivered by his own courier system, to his own desk, on the 22nd of June, containing a photograph of a plain white beehive in scrub brush, with an orange-topped marker post beside it, and nothing else. By the 8th of July, Fidencio Barones was the most obviously disloyal man in northern Mexico. He had, apparently, sold out 3 plazas and 11 crossings, and the proof was that the information had moved through his own private courier chain, which nobody else could use, which was the entire basis of his authority. He spent 2 weeks doing the only thing a man in that position can do, which is insist, with total sincerity, that he did not send them. Nobody had ever needed to believe him before because nobody had ever doubted him, and so he had never built the one thing every honest man builds by accident over a lifetime, a reputation for being believed when he denies something. He had spent 30 years making sure that when something arrived, it was from him. He was arrested on the 4th of September, alone, in a rented apartment in Culiacan, with a dyed beard, by Mexican federal police acting on information provided by 3 separate people who wanted him more than they wanted each other. And he went into a system he had spent his whole life outside of, and the men he had spent his life sending things to were now on the other side of every wall. He was, in the most exact sense of the word, delivered. Rigoberto Zepeda took a plea in Texas 11 months later on a federal charge, and one line of his proffer became slightly famous inside a very small community of people. Asked to describe the operation against his organization on the 11th of June, he said there had been no operation. Asked to clarify, he said, "One man made some phone calls. I don't know his name. Nobody does. Everyone we knew simply stopped knowing us." Ismael Ruelas was found in Zacatecas by people who were not police. And Ruben Osuna, the 26-year-old with the bad haircut whose cousin's kid went to Wexcombe on a scholarship, walked into the Bexar County Sheriff's Office 9 days later with a lawyer that somebody had paid for. He served 4 years. When he came out, there was a job waiting for him at a queen-rearing operation outside a nothing town called Verdine, and Vern Lance taught him to do international permits, and he was terrible at it for about a year, and then he was good at it. Keenan Stancil never told his son what he had been. He did not have to. Rowan worked most of it out by 19 and asked exactly one question, at a kitchen table, which was whether the men who took him were alive. His father said some of them. Rowan said, "Would you have?" And Keenan Stancil, who had not lied to the boy since Talitha died, said, "I didn't need to. That's the only reason I get to say no." The hives came off the Ravenhill on the 16th of June, on schedule, per the lease, exactly as Keenan had said they would in April. Ordell Ravenhill lived another 4 years and told the story badly at every opportunity. And the coffee can went back under the paving stone behind the queen-rearing shed with the phone inside it and the graph paper folded in the bread bag, and there are now 34 names on the sheet, because Keenan Stancil had crossed off the 4 he spent and added something else at the bottom in pencil, on the last line, which Rowan found 9 years later, when his father was dying, and he went out back with a trowel, because he had always known it was there. The last line said, "Ruben, Falfurious, Ode." Not O's. Ode. I keep coming back to the smoke, because the thing Fidencio Barones got wrong was not that he underestimated a beekeeper. Plenty of people underestimate plenty of people and go on with their lives. What he got wrong was much more specific, and it is the thing I want to leave you with, and it is worth more than the 90 minutes. He believed that leverage is the same thing as connection. 30 years of sending mothers birthday cakes and children's school shoes had taught him that a human being is a machine with a slot in it, and if you put the right object in the slot, the person does what you want. And he was right about that, far more often than anyone would like to admit. That is why he was rich. But leverage runs out. Every time you use it, it gets weaker, because fear is a wasting asset. The second cake is less frightening than the first, and by the fourth, the man just wants you dead. Barones had been spending down a balance for 3 decades without ever making a deposit, and he had no idea, because everyone he had ever frightened had stayed frightened long enough for him to walk away. Keenan Stancil had spent the same 3 decades doing the exact opposite, and, this is the part that gets me, not on purpose, not as a strategy. He took a translator's name off a list because it was 4 in the morning and he was tired and the man had kids. He walked a 26-year-old woman out a service door because she was 26. He did not write those things down as investments. He wrote them down on graph paper in a coffee can because he was the kind of man who kept records and because he could not quite throw the memory away. And then, once, in 90 minutes, with his son in a shipping container, he found out what he actually had. I don't think most of us get to find out. I don't think most of us should have to. But I do think it is worth sitting with the question, which is not who owes me money, and it is not who would take my call. It's harder and quieter than that. It is who is out there, right now, going about their life, carrying around a version of you that is larger than you actually are, because of something you did when it cost you something and nobody saw it, and you never mentioned it again. Count them. Take a real minute and count them. If the number is 0, that is not a moral failing, but it is information, and you have time. And if you are lucky enough that the number is not 0, then do the thing that makes the whole story work. Don't cache any of it. Don't remind them. Don't call in the small one. Leave it exactly where it is, gaining value in the dark, and go be somebody's neighbor for another 20 years. Because a man in a white suit with bad hands and a smoker in his left hand sat on a tailgate at the end of the world and made 8 phone calls, and the reason all 8 of them worked is that he had never made a 9th. Take care of your people. I'll see you in the next one.